Conversations That Matter is a partner program of the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Welcome. You know, I have to start off by saying I'm a little embarrassed that in some ways that we're having this conversation, because I want to believe that we live in a world where there's equal access to opportunity for men and women, and that we continue to move in that direction. And yet when I take a look at the statistics around women in computing sciences, the numbers are sadly very low.
Yes, they are.
And you, probably more than anybody, know why we're in that position. And I understand that there's a number of components. It's not easy. You can't just put your finger on one thing and say, there it is. But in doing my research, I look back from the 50s through to the 80s in computing sciences. There were a considerable greater number of women in computing sciences then, and then along came the advent of the personal computer. What happened then?
I think the thing that changed was when computers were these big things that nobody had in their home or their school, you could think of them as, well, you had to be able to type, and women were typically trained in typing. And so women, and particularly because computers came about during World War II, when women were the first programmers, it just was sort of natural. And then when personal computers made it into homes and schools, the primary thing that children used them for was to play games. And most of the games were, let's say, boy-centric. And that's partly because they were designed by young men, but it's also true that the computing capability was very, very limited. And so the easiest things to be able to do were things where you would shoot. So you'd shoot at rockets, or you'd shoot at monsters, or you'd shoot at whatever. And so very quickly, boys took over the computers in homes and schools, and they also, because they were really fascinated by the computer games, they learned how to program. And so just very rapidly became the case that both teachers and parents and children themselves thought that computers were a boy thing.
Teachers also thought that they were boy thing.
So what do you do if you have a computer in your classroom and the only people who use it are boys, and that boys know how to do things on the computer that you as a teacher don't have a clue?
Already at elementary school?
At elementary school, yeah. So I think a very big part of it was the boys took over computers, both in homes and schools, and everyone just sort of assumed they were a boy thing. So if you think about, and there's lots of research going back to the early 90s that shows that if you look at girls, say between grade 8 and grade 12, they uniformly think that there's two areas that they're not interested in and will not be as good at.
Which are? Computer
science and engineering. And sure enough, that's where you see the smallest numbers of women. There's what's interesting is, I mean, people often think, oh, it must be the math. Girls aren't good at math. But in fact, about 45% of the bachelor's degrees in math have gone to women for the last 30 years. 30% of the PhDs have gone to women for roughly the last 20 years.
So it's not math?
It's not math. It's definitely not math. It's definitely, there's an image that goes with being a software developer, a software engineer, a computer programmer, and they think of it as being socially awkward young men. And they don't think they'd like to hang out with those guys, and they don't think that they would be good at it, and so they don't go into it. And of course, because this is so simple, it's actually very simple to change. So if you make, your introductory computer science course in university be one that's highly engaging, that is not intimidating, so everyone is encouraged to think they'll do well, and if you simply encourage the young women in the classes to take the next computer science course and then the next course after that, it's actually relatively easy to raise the percentage of women majoring in computer science from something like 15% to 30%.
So I saw you talking about the dynamic that happens in those classrooms, though. You get these socially awkward young men who aren't necessarily comfortable around young women, but they've also been in an environment growing up where they don't have teachers who are able to say, yes, but now let me show you the next. next step, and then they run into a professor who can.
And then they just go nuts. I mean, it's like they use up far more than their proportional share of the airtime in the classroom because they've met somebody who can explain it to them. And that is so wonderful for them that they just naturally talk a lot, and they talk about arcane things that none of the other students in class would ever have heard. And of course, the reaction from the other students in the class is, oh my goodness, I don't belong here. Joey over there knows so much more than I do. I'll never pass this class. But that's easy to fix too.
Well, in theory, but the reality is that it's taken a long time to identify that that's been part of the problem. So how do we address that?
So all that you need to do, so if it's a relatively small class, the professor can just have a one-on-one conversation with each of the young men that are just displaying this particular behavior.
Over enthusiasm,
yeah.
yes.
And just say, you know, Joey, I love having you in my class. You're one of the most passionate students I've taught in many years. And I love talking to you about computer science, and let's just do our conversations outside the classroom because there are a few of the other students who find how much you know a little bit intimidating. And it works. Now, let's suppose it's a class with 200 people in it or 500 people in it. Then you have the TAs do it. But it's really the same concept that you're validating their passion and their interest, but you're just simply moving those conversations out of the classroom so that it doesn't intimidate the students who haven't had that prior experience.
Got to get you to hang on for just a second while we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you. If we go back to the early days of personal computing and you go, well, it was relatively simple. I mean, you'd program it to shoot at something or jump or grab something and so on. That was relatively rudimentary programming, especially based on where we're at today. So now we're 30 years, 35 years into the whole personal computing experience. And I think of Moore's Law and the doubling of, of our knowledge and the mass of data, and think, okay, well, how, if you're only coming into this at the university level, does somebody who doesn't have a relationship with computers say, how do I climb that mountain?
So it's not a big mountain. That's
It's
that's what's really interesting, because we used to have computer science taught in schools. To a very large extent, that is no longer the case, and that's because the salaries that computer programmers or software engineers can earn is so much higher than that of a school teacher. And so access to actually learning computer science in junior high school or high school is actually much less than it used to be. But even for the students who do get access, they're not learning anything in those courses that's any different from what we taught, 30 years ago. So what's really true is that if you start the very first course in college, university, and you know absolutely nothing, there's nothing that's stopping you from graduating as one of the top computer science graduates 4 years later. And if you're in a co-op program 5 years later, and so much the better because you'll actually get work experience. But it's so interesting because at MUD we have probably 70% of our income, and we're a science and engineering school, so we're attracting students who are really passionate about math, science, and engineering. They also have to be passionate about the humanities and social sciences and the arts because they do a lot of that too. But their major is going to be in science or engineering or math. And I would say probably less than half of the students have had any computer science experience. And that's certainly true for most of our female students. And most of the when we look at who we graduate, the students who graduate arriving with absolutely no experience do just as well as the students who arrived with, say, a full year of university computer science experience.
So young women, though, also take a look at the industry. For the last 3 decades, it's been dominated by predominantly white men with, as we pointed out, limited social comfort interaction. And so they create this environment that's like reflective of who they are. Entering that world must not necessarily seem like such an attractive option as a workplace to go to. So how do we address that?
So I think it depends a lot on whether the company is really serious about trying to create a supportive and encouraging work environment for everyone or not. And certainly I would say in startup companies there's a huge range of experience. It could go from everything from being very supportive to you couldn't possibly be able to code. You're a girl kind of thing. And in the larger companies, I think there's more tension, but it's still challenging because, as you said, if the dominant sort of personality and culture has been, men with not the greatest social skills who like to be combative and adversarial, that's not going to be a very good place. But I have a great story to tell you about a company trying to change this. So Accenture, big consulting company in the US, but multinational, hires 17,000 engineers a year in India. 17,000 every year.
Wow.
So I was giving a talk at a conference called HR 50, which is for the chief human resources officers from 50 large multinational companies. And after I was talking about how do you make your environment one in which women will thrive and stay, and for tech environments. And afterwards, the chief HR officer, Ellen Shute, came up to me and she said, wow, we are hiring about 30% of our engineers in India being female. And you've given me enough ideas, I think I can change that. Now, 30's high for a tech company.
It's higher than here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's higher than Microsoft or Google or Intel or Facebook or Apple, whatever. I saw her 4 months later and she said, Maria, you won't believe this. And I said, what? She said, okay, I set my recruiting folks in India the target of bringing in 45% of the hires being female. And all we changed was we changed the job descriptions, we changed the interview process, and we changed where we did our recruiting. So we also recruited all women's engineering colleges, of which there are quite a few in India. And we came in at 43%. That's all they changed.
That's it.
That's it. So, when people tell me, wow, it's really hard to make a difference, I'm going, no, you just have to be intentional about it. You need to think about the things that are going to make women be interested in a job. So, for example, one of the things we did at Harvey and a number of other places done as well, we frame computer science as creative problem solving.
Okay.
Using computational approaches.
Computational.
You've got to have computers in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? We also frame engineering as creative problem solving. And it's pretty hard to find a young person, male or female, who doesn't want to be seen as being creative. And particularly if they're interested in math and science and engineering, they're going to want to solve problems. And so when you frame it that way and you show them you can actually solve real problems in the world today, whether it's the spread of a disease or whether it's figuring out how to make a bridge that's going to stay up or any of these kinds of things. When you frame it that way, women can see that it's interesting. And then, of course, on top of that, you need to make it supportive. And, so the way we sort of talk about it is our curriculum is incredibly rigorous and challenging. It is.
Well, that's what you're known for.
Yes.
For being a very hard school.
It's a very hard school. But what we say is it's really rigorous and challenging, and everybody's going to need to get help, but you're going to thrive. Everybody who works hard and gets help is going to succeed. So you're both sort of setting the expectation that, yeah, don't be surprised if you find it really difficult. Everybody finds it really difficult. And what's interesting to me is I'll often ask our first-year students in their first semester, okay, what's your favorite course? And then what are you struggling the most with? And they'll typically say something like, oh, my favorite course is special relativity. And that's also by far the hardest course because it's mind-blowing. Or my favorite course is CS5. That's our intro CS class. And I need so much help because I've never done anything with computers before. So it's this idea of matching rigor and challenge with an environment that says, we're going to give you help. Everybody's going to need help. It's not about being, you know, a lesser student because you need help, because everybody needs help. So it's this combination of setting the challenge and the rigor, but also setting the environment so you're actually encouraging them to succeed.
This is our second of 3 breaks. We'll be back in a moment. Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you. One of the other components, as I understand, is the imposter syndrome. And women fall victim to it more than their male counterparts.
Absolutely.
And
that's me.
And in computing sciences, I mean, you're going, oh my gosh, look at what I'm dealing with here. What effect does that have?
So I've thought about the imposter syndrome for a long time. I started talking about it, I think, sometime in the mid-1990s, so about 20 years ago. And as I've been thinking about this and talking to, a lot of women over the last 20 years is, there's a correlation between feeling this way about yourself and being very successful. So I have come to the conclusion, actually, having the imposter syndrome is a great thing. Why is it a great thing? Well, first of all, it makes you, it means you're setting very high expectations for your performance. And it means you're constantly not quite living up to that, or even, like dismally failing. So what happens when you fail? You examine what was going on, and you think about how you could do better the next time. And so I think a big part of the imposter syndrome is we're setting a very high bar for success, and then we're constantly trying to learn from failure. Now, the only bad thing about it is if it causes you not to reach for the next step up.
Right. Because I think Sheryl Sandberg pointed out in a pretty famous TED Talk that this is one of the things that hold back women from reaching beyond
the very top levels.
Yeah.
Yes. So the important thing is, and I also talk about this a lot, is you just have to be, so acknowledge that you have the imposter syndrome, live with it. I mean, it's not that big a deal, but just constantly reach beyond where you think you can get to.
It's still hard to do, though, because you go, I don't want to make a fool out of myself. I mean,
I make a fool out of myself all the time. I mean,
you tell that wonderful story about your first day at going to the board at Microsoft. And
oh my God!
Oh my gosh! Right?
I'm being terrified. Yes. So I was at the ski race in Aspen, and I'm terrified. I mean, I'm totally terrified. I mean, there are these gates. It's timed. I mean, I'm not at all sure I can even ski the hill, let alone with the gates and all this stuff. You just do it. And the good thing about just taking these risks and just doing it is you get used to it. I mean, you just have to be willing to say, okay, I'm going to take a shot, I'm going to do my best, and whatever happens, that's fine. And, I've gotten used to sort of saying, okay, I'm going to reach out to people who I have no idea of whether they know who I am or not. Like, I was at the TED conference and Travis, the CEO of Uber, came by and I went, hi, Travis. I have met Travis. He didn't have a clue who I was. But just being willing to sort of say, I'm willing to reach out. I'm willing to try things. And if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world.
This is our final break. We'll be right back. Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you. Is going into computing sciences as a career for women a risk, or is there tremendous opportunity that is being missed right now?
It's tremendous opportunity. So let me tell you about my sister, Katrina. Katrina just turned 61. She's my younger sister. And she has a PhD in anthropology and religion from Emory University, taught for a number of years, but has fibromyalgia and is really seriously disabled with it. But I told her, Katrina, you should just really learn how to do web development. So she took her first 2 courses at NATE, Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, last semester. She got A+ in each of them. She's taking computer programming and database this semester, and it's such a wonderful thing for her to be doing. So the thing I say is, first of all, the opportunity is really out there, and whether you're a young person and you're going to end up being a software engineer, whether you're a middle-aged person, or let's say 60s middle-aged right now, like my sister.
I'm willing to go with that.
Yes. You can do it. And, you can use it in healthcare, you can use it in finance, you can use it in linguistics, you can use it in psychology, you can use it to do peace negotiations around the world. So I have to tell you about my daughter, Sasha. So Sasha's 31, and I've been trying to get her to program forever. And last March, she sends me and our son an email saying, I want to create an interactive website that demonstrates how international law impacts on peace and peace negotiations. And I realize I'm going to have to be able to program to do this. And here's a kind of site I'm thinking about, Stanford Law School. And she says, so what would I need to learn to do this? My son writes back and says, well, probably some JavaScript and some CSS. And she writes back and she says, okay, how long would it take me to learn that? He says, half a day. And she goes, will you teach me? And sure enough, they were both in Claremont visiting, and she learned how to do it.
So I hear you saying that you don't have to be entering this in your teens or 20s to have a career in this. You could even have a mid-career change, go
Absolutely.
back to school and learn, and still have opportunity.
And people do. And let me say, seeing we're in Vancouver, let me just point out that University of British Columbia has a second bachelor's program. If you have a bachelor's degree in anything at any time, you can get a bachelor's of computer science in 2 years.
We did an interview with Norm Francis from Pivotal, and he went through the computing sciences program in the 1970s, and that was the thing that changed his life.
Wow.
He was an accountant, but he took that computing sciences program and it changed his life. And it shouldn't be limited to just men. There should be...
It should be for everyone. And so one of the things, so this year in our CS major, 54% of the graduates will be female.
Isn't that fabulous?
However, what's really exciting for us, being in the U.S., is now we have African American and Hispanic students making up our something. So we worked very hard on getting more women at MUD, and now been working hard on getting more students of color at MUD. And so my whole goal is, let's just prove that anyone who brings hard work, passion, persistence can actually succeed.
I love what former U.S. President Bill Clinton says about caring or setting aside our minor differences and embracing our common humanity.
Yep.
If we do this, we all succeed.
We all succeed.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Pleasure.
My
meeting you.
pleasure.
Yeah.